The flag came down in 4 minutes and 31 seconds. Fleet Commander Varric Sol watched from the bridge of his ship as the last symbol of the Dranaki people was pulled from the tower it had flown above for 600 years. A soldier folded it, handed it to a clerk. The clerk put it in a box. The box went into a crate. The crate went into a cargo hold. And that was the end of the Dranaki as a free people. Varric Sol was already reading the next file. He had done this 43 times. 43 worlds, 43 flags, 43 civilizations that had looked up at his fleet and made the correct decision, the smart decision. Surrender was not defeat. He believed that. He told himself that every time. The Empire did not destroy what it conquered. It organized it, gave it roads and laws and trade routes. The Dranaki would be fine. Unhappy, maybe, but fine. The next file was thin. That was the first thing he noticed. Every world he had ever pacified came with a briefing document of at least 60 pages. Intelligence reports, military assessments, population data, cultural analysis, psychological profiles of their leaders. 60 pages minimum. He had once received a 400-page briefing for a civilization that surrendered before his fleet even finished forming up. This file was 4 pages. World designation UX7714. Local name Earth. Single habitable planet. 1 moon, 1 star. Population approximately 9 billion of a species called humans. No faster than light travel. No energy weapons. No contact with any other species in the galaxy. They did not know the Empire existed. 4 pages. He read all of it in 11 minutes. There was almost nothing interesting. Humans were carbon-based, bipedal. They had divided their single planet into nearly 200 smaller political territories and spent several thousand years fighting each other over them. They had developed nuclear weapons, weapons capable of destroying cities with a single use. And then, instead of using them to settle their conflicts permanently, they had pointed them at each other for almost a century, without ever pulling the trigger. His military analyst had flagged that as primitive aggression, threat level low. There was one section at the back of the file, a minority report, submitted by a xenopsychologist named Ori. He almost skipped it. Minority reports were usually the work of people who thought too much and decided too little. He read the first 2 paragraphs. Ori had found something in the human data that bothered her. Every species in the galaxy, when it reached a certain level of technology, slowed down. The growth curve plateaued. It made sense. Once a species met other civilizations, traded with them, learned from them, the pace of their own development leveled out. There was a ceiling, and most species found it within a few centuries of first contact. Humans had never had first contact, and their growth curve had never plateaued. It just kept going. Faster and faster, like something that had no idea it was supposed to stop. Ori had run the numbers 4 different ways. The result was the same every time. She had written in the dry language of a scientific report. The acceleration curve does not follow any known model. Further analysis is recommended before any military engagement is authorized. Varric Sol read that sentence twice. Then he closed the file. Ori was a scientist. Scientists saw patterns in everything. That was their job, and also their weakness. The humans had no spaceflight, no energy weapons, no allies. They were 9 billion people on one planet who had spent their history fighting each other with explosives and metal. The curve she was worried about was probably just a measurement error. He sent her a brief reply. Noted, thank you. He did not invite her to the tactical briefing. The briefing was short. It always was, by this point in his career. He had a system. 200 ships would move ahead of the main fleet as a vanguard. They would arrive in Earth's solar system, allow their presence to be detected, and wait. Within minutes, every government on the planet would be broadcasting emergency signals. Military channels would light up with panic transmissions, and Earth's leadership would begin the process of deciding how to surrender. Then, the negotiation team would move in. The pacification protocols would begin, and inside of 11 days, the whole thing would be resolved. 11 days. He had written it in his personal log that night. Before he went to sleep, he read. This was his ritual. Before every campaign, he chose a piece of the target civilization's literature. He had read 43 novels, 43 poems, 43 stories. He found it useful. A civilization's stories told you who they were faster than any intelligence report. He chose a human novel. It had been translated into High Imperial by one of his cultural staff. It was considered, according to the file, one of the greatest works the humans had ever produced. He read it in 2 hours. He found it deeply strange. The main character, the hero, the one the reader was supposed to care about, lost. Not in a small way, in a complete way, lost everything, failed everyone, died at the end with nothing resolved. And the humans loved this story. It was taught in their schools. Parents read it to their children. They had made it into films, plays, paintings. Generations of humans had looked at a story about complete and total failure and said, yes. That one. That is the one we keep. Varric Sol put the book down and stared at the ceiling of his cabin for a long time. He decided it was a cultural immaturity, a species that had not yet grown out of wallowing in darkness. Once they joined the Empire, they would learn to tell better stories, happier ones. He turned off the light. In the morning, the fleet jumped. 2,247 warships folded through hyperspace in a sequence that took 40 minutes and looked from outside like stars blinking out one by one. The largest pacification fleet ever assembled for a pre-contact world. It was, technically, more than necessary. But Varric Sol was thorough. He had always been thorough. 43 worlds without a single casualty on the Imperial side. He intended to keep it that way. The jump took 16 hours. He slept through most of it. About the hero dying alone on a field of mud, looking up at a sky that did not care. And he could not understand. Even in the dream he could not understand why anyone would choose to love that story. He woke up 2 hours before arrival. He washed his face, put on his uniform, walked to the bridge, stood in his usual spot at the center of the command floor, with 2,246 ships behind him, and a small, unremarkable planet ahead of him. And he felt what he always felt at this moment. Ready. He had done this 43 times. He knew exactly how it went. The fleet dropped out of hyperspace. And for the first time in 43 campaigns, absolutely nothing happened the way it was supposed to. The first thing Varric Sol noticed was the silence. Not silence on the bridge. His crew was moving, checking instruments, running arrival protocols, doing everything they were trained to do. The silence was coming from outside, from the direction of the small blue planet sitting 60 million kilometers ahead of them. He started his internal clock the moment the fleet completed its arrival sequence. He always did. It was a habit built across 43 campaigns. The record for fastest panic response from a pre-contact world was 3 minutes and 40 seconds. That had been a species called the Veth, who had 17 separate governments, and all 17 of them started broadcasting emergency signals almost simultaneously. He had found it almost impressive. He watched his clock now. 4 minutes. Nothing. His communications officer, a young male named Peck, turned from his station. Their detection grid activated 11 seconds after we arrived. They know we're here. Varric Sol nodded. Of course they knew. 2,000 ships dropping out of hyperspace was not subtle. What are they broadcasting? Peck checked his instruments. Checked them again. Nothing, sir. No emergency signals. No military channel activity. No leadership communications we can detect. He paused. They are completely quiet. Varric Sol had seen quiet before. Some civilizations went quiet from shock. The sheer scale of an Imperial fleet locked them up the way a small animal locks up when it sees something larger than anything it has a word for. It never lasted. Shock gave way to panic inside of 10 minutes, always. He watched his clock. 7 minutes, still nothing. He was about to order a standard diplomatic hail when Peck turned around again. His face had a quality Varric Sol had not seen on a crew member's face in a very long time. Uncertainty. Sir, we're receiving a signal from the planet. Single transmission. Tight beam, directed specifically at this ship. He looked down at his screen. It's a data package. Decrypt it. It took the linguistics team 4 minutes to open the package. Varric Sol waited without moving. When the lead linguist finally spoke, her voice had something strange in it, a flatness that meant she was working very hard to sound calm. It's a transcript, sir. Of what? Of your personal log, specifically the entry you recorded last night, before we jumped. The bridge went quiet in a different way than before. Varric Sol read the transcript on the display in front of him. Every word, including the parts he had recorded in his private cabin, on an encrypted military system, on a ship that had not yet been anywhere near this solar system when he recorded it. Estimated campaign duration, 11 days. He stood very still for a moment. Then he said, in a voice that gave nothing away, "Raise their leadership on standard diplomatic frequencies. Full courtesy protocol." It took 20 minutes to establish a channel. He used the time to think. The xenopsychologist's report moved through his mind. The growth curve that never plateaued. The development pattern that matched no known model. He told himself there was a rational explanation. There was always a rational explanation. The channel opened. He spoke in standard galactic. He introduced himself, his rank, his mission. He explained, in the measured language of an empire that had done this 43 times, that Earth had been selected for integration. That the process was not hostile. That cooperation would be met with fairness, and that the civilization would be preserved. He extended the option of immediate capitulation. It was a good speech. It had always worked before. Earth's response came back in High Imperial, not Standard Galactic. High Imperial, the bureaucratic language of the Empire's administrative class, a language used internally, a language that Earth had no official way of knowing existed. The response was one sentence. Fleet Commander Varric Sol, we have been watching your empire for 60 years. We have been watching you personally for 19. We would like to give you an opportunity to leave. This is the only time we will offer it. He read it 3 times. 60 years. They had been watching for 60 years. Humanity had no faster-than-light travel, no known contact with any galactic civilization, no seat at any interstellar council, and they had been watching the Empire for 60 years, in secret, without anyone knowing. And they had been watching him for 19. He was 51 years old. That meant they had begun watching him when he was 32, the year of his 8th campaign. He tried to remember what he had been doing at 32. He had been a mid-rank fleet officer, not famous, not particularly important, just competent and rising. They had noticed him anyway. A message came through from the rear of the fleet, from Ori. He almost did not open it. When he did, it contained 3 words. Turn the fleet around. He did not respond to her. He set the message aside. He had 2,000 ships behind him and 43 successful campaigns in front of him. And he was not going to be rattled by a planet that knew his name. He ordered the fleet to advance. Begin standard Vanguard protocol, he said. 200 ships forward. The rest, hold position. His sensor officer, a quiet, careful female named Sheva, was running long-range scans of the solar system as the fleet began to move. This was also standard. He always mapped the terrain before advancing. Good information saved lives. Sheva ran her scans. She ran them again. Commander. Her voice had the same quality as the linguist's. that careful flatness. I'm getting an anomalous reading from Earth's moon. Define anomalous. The near side reads as natural. Normal geological signature. But the far side, she stopped, started again. The far side has a different reading. A very different reading. Different how? She turned from her station and looked at him directly. In 43 campaigns, his sensor officer had never turned from her station to look at him directly. Information always came through protocol. She always faced her instruments. She was not facing her instruments now. It's hollow, sir, she said. The far side of their moon is hollow. The structural readings suggest it has been hollow for at least 200 years. Nobody on the bridge said anything. Varric Sol looked at the planet ahead of them. Blue and white and quiet. 9 billion people who had never met another species, who had spent their history fighting each other with explosives, who did not yet have faster-than-light travel, who had, for reasons he could not explain, spent 200 years quietly carving out the inside of their moon. He thought about the novel he had read, the hero dying in the mud, and the humans keeping that story for generations, teaching it to their children, loving it. He had thought it meant they were immature. He was beginning to think it meant something else entirely. He should have turned the fleet around. He did not turn the fleet around. Continue the advance, he said. The 200 Vanguard ships moved forward, and from somewhere inside the hollow moon, something began to wake up. Earth Planetary Defense Grid. Autonomous Engagement Log. Timestamp 04-1703 UTC. Foreign fleet detected. 2,247 vessels. Classification: hostile. Engagement authorization: standing order, pre-approved. Council Resolution 7, ratified March 2041. No human authorization required. No human authorization sought. All systems online. Commencing. The Vanguard moved at standard advance speed. Varric Sol watched them on the main display. 200 ships spreading into a wide formation. Textbook positioning. Exactly the shape he had used 43 times before. It worked, because it covered all response angles. There was no good defensive position against it. The target civilization would see the formation, understand what it meant, and the final push towards surrender would begin. His communications team was monitoring Earth's military channels. Still nothing. The planet was still not broadcasting anything. Not one panicked transmission. Not one military frequency activated. He had stopped finding that reassuring approximately 30 minutes ago. Vanguard at 30% advance, his navigation officer reported. Varric Sol nodded. He stood with his hands behind his back, the way he always stood on the bridge during an operation. Still, controlled. A commander did not show doubt to his crew. Whatever he was feeling, and he was feeling something he did not have a clean name for, it stayed behind his face. Sheva, his sensor officer, was running continuous scans of the moon. She had been running them since her report. She had not said anything else yet. He noticed she had not looked at her instruments in the last several minutes. She was staring at her screen without reading it, the way a person stares at something when they are waiting for news they already know is going to be bad. Vanguard at 40% advance. Earth Planetary Defense Grid. Autonomous Engagement Log. Timestamp 04-1744 UTC. Lunar Battery 1 through 88 online. Orbital Platform Network. All 312 stations online. Deep Space Interdiction Mines. Field designation Labyrinth. Armed. Note: Labyrinth was seeded across a 4 light-hour radius, beginning in 2067. Foreign fleet transited through the field, on arrival. All 2,247 vessels are currently within the detonation envelope. Mines have been in passive mode since fleet arrival, awaiting optimal targeting solution. Optimal targeting solution achieved. The first ship disappeared from Varric Sol's display, at 04:17:51 UTC. He saw it go. One moment it was there, a clean green indicator on the tactical screen, designation V7, one of his Vanguard ships, 1,200 crew members, a vessel that had served in 9 campaigns. Then it was not there. No explosion, no distress signal, no debris reading. It was simply gone, the way a light goes out. He had time to think. Sensor malfunction. Then V12 disappeared. V3, V19, V44. Report, he said. Nobody reported. Not because they were ignoring him, because they had nothing. Every station on the bridge was showing the same thing. Ships vanishing from the display, one after another, in a sequence that made no tactical sense. From different positions, different distances, as if something were reaching into the formation and pulling ships out, individually and casually, the way a person pulls weeds. The hull flexed. He felt it through his boots, a deep, low movement that traveled up through the floor and into his legs, the kind of physical feeling that happens when something very large and very fast passes close to the ship without hitting it. He had felt that feeling once before, during a training exercise near a collapsing star. He had not expected to feel it in what was supposed to be an 11-day administrative operation. Hull reading, he said. Negative impact, sir, someone said. Something passed us. We can't. A pause. We cannot identify what it was. Earth Planetary Defense Grid. Autonomous Engagement Log. Timestamp. 04:18:02 UTC. Engagement duration, 11 seconds. Fleet status, neutralized. Vessels destroyed 2,246. Vessels permitted to survive, 1. The flagship. Classification, intentional. Rationale, a message requires a messenger. Flagging the flagship's unique identifier. Standing down all active systems. Monitoring mode engaged. Awaiting further instruction. No further instruction expected. Varric Sol stood in a silence that was different from any silence he had ever experienced. The tactical display in front of him showed one ship. In a space where, 11 seconds ago, 2,247 ships had been, there was now one. The display kept trying to update. The system was designed to track an entire fleet, and it kept searching for signals that were not there. The way a dog keeps looking at a door after the person who used to walk through it is gone. He made himself look at the crew. They were all still at their stations. Nobody had run. Nobody had made a sound. They were sitting in the specific stillness of people whose brains have received information that the rest of them has not yet processed. They looked like people waiting to wake up from something. Peck, his communications officer, was the first to speak. His voice was very careful, very even. The voice of a person who has decided that if they just keep speaking normally, then normal things will continue to be true. We are receiving a transmission from the planet. Varric Sol turned to face the screen. The transmission was in High Imperial again. Short. 1 paragraph. You have been given a gift, Fleet Commander Varric Sol. You are the only living being in this galaxy who has seen what we can do and is still alive to describe it. We want you to think about that. We want you to understand that we chose to let you live, just now, in the same way that you would choose to let a bird out of a window. Not because the bird was dangerous, but because there was no reason to harm it. Go home, tell them what you saw, spend that gift wisely. He read it twice. Chose to let you live, not spared by luck, not missed by accident, chosen deliberately. From the middle of a battle that had lasted 11 seconds, something on that planet had identified his flagship specifically and made a decision, not a military decision, a considered decision, a decision that included the word gift and excluded him from what happened to everything else. He had gone into 43 campaigns as the most dangerous thing in the sky. He had just been let out of a window. He sat down. He did not mean to. His legs simply made the decision without consulting him, and he sat in his command chair, and he looked at the empty tactical display, and he tried to find something in his 43 campaigns and his 51 years of life that had given him any equipment for this moment. He could not find anything. Behind him, Sheva said, very quietly, "The moon has gone dark again." Just like that, it had turned on, done what it had done in 11 seconds. The way you turn off a kitchen light when you leave a room because you are done in there, and there is nothing left to do. He sat in the chair of his flagship, alone in a space that had held 2,000 ships 11 seconds ago. And for the first time in 43 campaigns, Fleet Commander Varric Sol did not know what to do next. He had one order left in him. "Take us home," he said. The journey home took 16 hours. Varric Sol spent most of it sitting at the table in his private cabin, not eating the food that was brought to him, not sleeping, not reading. He sat with the engagement log open on the screen in front of him and read it the way a person reads a letter they have already read 50 times, hoping that this time it will say something different. It always said 11 seconds. He wrote his report on the 14th hour. He had written 43 reports before this one. They were generally straightforward documents: fleet movements, resistance levels, pacification timeline, final casualty count. They followed a template. He had the template memorized. This report did not fit the template. He wrote it in plain language instead. He described everything in the order it happened, without interpretation, without analysis, without the comfortable language of military procedure. He described the silence, the transcript of his private log, transmitted from a planet that should not have been able to read it. The hollow moon, the 11 seconds, the transmission that called what happened a gift. He read it back when he was done. He deleted 2 paragraphs where he had, without noticing, started to try to make it sound less like what it was. He sent it as it was, plain and complete and terrible. The Imperial High Council chamber was the largest indoor space on the capital world. The ceiling was 200 meters above the floor. The walls were covered in the names of every civilization the Empire had ever absorbed, 600 of them, in lettering that had taken stonemasons 4 generations to complete. The room had been designed to make everyone who entered it feel small and temporary in the face of the Empire's permanence. Varric Sol had been in this room 3 times before. He had always found it impressive. He did not find it impressive now. He found it large and cold, and full of people who did not yet know what he knew. The 11 council members sat at the curved table at the far end of the room. Old, all of them. The youngest was 140 years old, and the eldest was approaching 300. They had presided over expansion campaigns, trade agreements, diplomatic crises, and the absorption of 600 civilizations. They had never lost a campaign. Not once, in 4,000 years of imperial expansion, had a council member sat in that room and received news of a military defeat. Varric Sol stood before them and spoke for 6 hours. He walked them through everything: the thin briefing file, Ori's minority report and why he had set it aside, the fleet's arrival, and the silence that followed it, the transcript of his private log, transmitted before it should have been possible, the formation of the Vanguard, the 11 seconds. He put the sensor data on the main display, and he showed them the fleet disappearing, ship by ship, and then all at once. When he finished, the chamber was quiet. The council's senior military analyst, a male who had spent 90 years studying every significant military engagement in galactic history, leaned forward. "You said 11 seconds. Yes. For a fleet of that size? Yes." The analyst looked at the display for a long time. Then he said, "That is not possible." Varric Sol said nothing. He simply waited, the way he had learned to wait in the 16 hours on the ship home, because there was nothing to say that was more persuasive than the data already on the screen. The analyst looked at the data. He did not say anything else. One of the council members, a senior administrator named Voss, who managed the Empire's resource allocation and had never, to Varric Sol's knowledge, attended a single military briefing voluntarily, asked the question that he expected. How did they build all of this without us detecting it? Varric Sol had prepared for this question. He had known someone would ask it, because it was the comfortable question. The question that implied the problem was one of intelligence failure, of the Empire not watching carefully enough, a gap that could be closed and corrected. With respect, he said, that is not the right question. Voss looked at him. The right question is, how long have they had it? He pulled up Earth's public historical record, data the Empire's scouts had collected years ago, sitting in a file nobody had thought to examine closely, because the planet had been rated low priority. He showed the Council the construction records. The lunar excavation project, begun in 2047 and publicly documented in Earth's own media archives as a classified military program. The deep space minefield, which Earth had called Labyrinth in their own records, seeded across 4 light hours of space, beginning in 2067. The orbital platform network, 312 stations, which had been brought fully online in 2089. He let the dates sit in the room for a moment. Their first contact with any alien species was us, he said. We arrived 11 days ago. Before that, they had never spoken to another civilization, never traded with one, never been visited by one. They had no confirmed evidence that life existed anywhere else in the galaxy. He gestured at the construction records. They built all of this before they had any of that. They built a galactic-scale defense system for a war they had no proof was coming. The chamber was quiet again. Why? Voss asked. She was not being dismissive. She genuinely wanted to understand. Ori's final report was already on the display. Varric Sol had included it in his presentation materials. He brought it forward now. Ori had submitted it from the rear of the fleet during the journey home. It was 1 page, which for Ori was practically a short note. She had written it in plain language, the same way Varric Sol had written his report, because plain language was the only thing that fit anymore. She had studied Earth's full historical record during the mission, not the 4-page summary the scouts had produced, the full record, thousands of years of it. She had found something that she believed explained everything. Humanity had ended themselves 4 times. Not metaphorically, not partially. 4 distinct periods where their own actions, wars, environmental destruction, engineered diseases, cascading system failures, had brought them to the edge of total extinction. And 4 times they had pulled back. Not because someone saved them, because enough of them survived, and enough of those survivors decided to rebuild. And each time they rebuilt, they kept what had killed them in mind. As a lesson, Ori wrote, every other species we have studied, when faced with near extinction, responds in one of 2 ways. They become rigid, building walls, closing off, refusing to change. Or they collapse, losing the will to continue. Humanity did neither. They metabolized catastrophe. They took the worst thing that had ever happened to them and turned it into engineering. They did not build the lunar battery system and the minefield and the platform network because they knew we were coming. They built it because they understood from their own history that something like us was probably coming eventually. Because they would have come. Because that is what powerful civilizations do, and they knew it, because they had been that civilization to each other, over and over, for thousands of years. They are not an anomaly. They are a conclusion. They are what a species looks like at the end of 10,000 years of surviving itself. Varric Sol let the council read it. Then he said, they have also been watching the Empire for 60 years, quietly, without contact. We do not know the full extent of what they know about us. He paused. We do not know the full extent of what they have built. The chamber was very quiet. The vote took 12 minutes, Three options were presented: a second invasion with a larger fleet, diplomatic contact, or full strategic withdrawal and indefinite quarantine of Earth's sector. A blockade designation that would mark the entire region as off-limits to all Imperial vessels. The quarantine vote was unanimous. Varric Sol walked out of the chamber when it was done. He stood in the corridor outside, in the shadow of a building that had been designed to make everything feel permanent, and he thought about the novel. The human novel he had read the night before the jump. The hero who lost everything. The story a species had kept for generations and taught to their children and refused to let go of. He understood it now. It was not a story about loss. Admiral Yun Cassia heard about the fleet at 04-1803 UTC, 2 seconds after the grid logged the end of the engagement. She was in the Planetary Defense Command Center in Geneva, sitting at a desk with a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. She had been awake for 22 hours. When the engagement alert came through, a soft chime, almost polite, the kind of sound a calendar reminder makes, she looked at her screen, read the log entry twice, and then sat very still for about 30 seconds. 2,246 ships. 11 seconds. She picked up her cold coffee and drank what was left of it. Then she set the cup down and began the post-engagement review, which was a document she had rehearsed and updated every year for the past 9 years, and had never expected to actually write. The world wanted a celebration. By morning, every government on Earth had been briefed. By the afternoon, the news had leaked. It always leaked. And by the evening, people were in the streets. In Seoul, in Lagos, in Buenos Aires, in every city on the planet, people were looking up at the sky with an expression that sits somewhere between relief and disbelief. The expression of someone who bought insurance years ago as a precaution and has just discovered their house did not burn down. The press wanted to speak to the commander, the leader, the person who had looked the alien fleet in the eye and said, "Not today." Cassia sent a statement instead. She wrote it herself, in her office, with the door closed. She wrote 3 versions. She deleted the first 2 because they sounded like the kind of thing people wanted to hear, and she was not in the business of that. The 3rd version said, "We did not win today. We deterred today. Those are not the same thing. A win would mean we fought. We did not fight." A system that was built before most of us were born did exactly what the people who built it designed it to do. I have been head of Planetary Defense Command for 9 years. In those 9 years, I have not built a single new weapon. I have maintained what was already here. I have run the simulations, updated the protocols, kept the grid calibrated and ready. That is my job. The people who deserve recognition today are not standing in front of cameras. Most of them are dead. They made a decision in 2041 in a council room with no proof that any of this would ever be necessary, and they built something anyway, for people they would never meet, because they thought it was probably the right thing to do. I just kept the lights on. She sent it. She did not read the responses. There was a room on the lowest level of the Geneva Command Center that most of the staff did not know about. It was not on any of the official building maps. The door was unmarked. Cassia had a key, because every head of Planetary Defense Command was given a key on their first day, along with a single sentence of instruction. Go when you need to. Don't stay too long. She went that evening, when the building had quieted down. The room was small, no windows, one overhead light, the kind that hums slightly. A single display screen on the wall, and below it, in lettering that someone had pressed directly into the wall material by hand, one name at a time, 41 names. The members of the 2041 Council. The people who had looked at Earth's history, at 4 near extinctions, at a century of nuclear weapons pointed at each other, at every war and plague and disaster they had survived by the thinnest possible margin, and made a decision. Not a reactive decision, a deliberate one. They had sat in a room, and asked, "Given everything we know of powerful civilizations, given everything we know about what happens when a stronger force meets a weaker one, given everything we know about ourselves and what we would do if the positions were reversed, what is probably coming for us eventually from out there?" And then they had funded the answer. The lunar excavation. The minefield across 4 light hours of space, each mine quietly drifting in the dark for decades before it was ever needed. The orbital platform network. The grid itself. The autonomous system that needed no human hand on any trigger, because the people who built it had understood, with the clear-eyed practicality of a species that had survived itself 4 times, that in the moment it was actually needed, there might not be time for a human hand. 41 names, none of them alive to see this morning. Cassia stood in front of the wall and looked at the names for a long time. She thought about the alien commander. The file had his name by now. Varric Sol, rank of fleet commander, 43 prior campaigns. She wondered what he was doing right now, 16 hours away from home, on a ship full of silence. She wondered if he understood yet what he had actually run into. Not a weapon, a message, written in 2041, addressed to whoever came eventually, saying, "We know what you are. We know because we used to be you, and we decided, a long time ago, that we were done." She stayed in the room until the overhead light started to bother her eyes. Then she turned off the light and stood in the dark for a moment, with 41 names she couldn't see anymore, before she went back upstairs. The junior analyst who stopped her in the cafeteria hallway looked about 23. He had the specific energy of someone who had been awake for 30 hours on the strength of adrenaline and vending machine food, and was just now hitting the part of the night where the adrenaline runs out and the questions start. His name was Day. She had seen him in the monitoring room. He was good at his job. "Admiral," he said, he had clearly been working up to this. "What happens now?" She thought about the 41 names. She thought about Ori's report, which someone had translated and leaked, and which was already being read by people in 12 languages. She thought about the quarantine beacon the Empire would eventually place at the edge of their sector. She was confident they would place one, because she would have placed one. And about what it would say. "Now we build the next thing," she said. He blinked. "What next thing?" "Whatever the next threat is." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Do you know what the next threat is?" She thought about 4 extinctions. She thought about a species that had pointed nuclear weapons at itself for a century and come out the other side and decided that was enough of that. She thought about 41 people in a room with no proof and a very long plan. "We never do," she said. She walked past him toward the elevator. Behind her, she heard him thinking about it. The specific silence of a person whose brain is working on something it will keep working on for years. That was the right thing to leave in a person. Far out in the dark, at the edge of what the Empire would quietly begin calling the Forbidden Sector, a buoy was placed. It broadcast on all standard frequencies, in every language the Empire used, for any vessel that wandered close enough to receive it. Warning. Species designation, human. Threat classification, ungradable. Do not engage. Do not contact. Do not approach. The buoy drifted. The moon watched. Quiet, the way it had always been quiet, carrying its hollow dark interior and its 88 batteries and its 200 years of patient waiting. The specific and enormous patience of a species that had always understood, in its bones and its history and its 41 names pressed into a wall in a basement room, that the universe was very large and they were very small, and something was probably coming eventually. So they had made sure they were ready first. Not out of fear, out of the oldest and most human knowledge there is, that the worst things rarely announce themselves, that the dark between the stars is genuinely dark, and that the only honest answer to what's out there is we don't know, but we'll be prepared for it anyway. On Earth, the sun came up. People went to work. Children went to school. In Geneva, a cold cup of coffee sat on a desk in an empty office. In a basement room, 41 names caught the light from a screen that was still running the post-engagement review. The grid rested. Still watching. Still waiting. Always.